When my 8-year-old daughter collapsed at school, the teacher called my parents first. They never came. Instead, my sister tagged me in a photo. Family day without the drama. I said nothing. Days later, I returned from a business trip and shouted, "Why did you do that?" My daughter lowered her head, my mother smiled and said, "When the school nurse called me, I thought it was spam." I almost didn't answer. I was in Denver halfway through a conference lunch, pretending to care about mergers and client expansions while sipping cold coffee and wondering how much longer I could smile without snapping. I had 3 more days left before flying home. Leah was supposed to be fine. He was with my parents. Safe. Or so I thought. The nurse didn't waste time. She said Leah had collapsed during math class. Could have been exhaustion, stress, maybe something else. But she went pale, wouldn't respond, and her breathing was shallow. They called my parents first. That made sense, I guess. They were listed as emergency contacts while I was away. But they never showed up. I asked if they'd been reached. Twice, she said. My mother answered the first time and said she was in the middle of something and couldn't come. The second time, my dad answered and just said they didn't have her insurance card and to call the mom. That was it. No questions. No follow-up. Just shrugged her off like some neighbor's kid who fell off a bike. I thanked the nurse, barely managing to keep my voice steady, and hung up. I called my mom immediately. No answer. Then my dad. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. I texted them both. I even messaged my sister. No one responded. I was alone in that beige hotel room, pacing the floor with my phone glued to my hand, refreshing every app, waiting for something. Anything. But all I got 2 hours later was a notification that my sister tagged me in a Facebook post. It was a photo. Everyone was in it. My parents, my sister, her boys, even my brother's wife. A winery. Glasses of rose, charcuterie boards, sunshine. They were all smiling, arms wrapped around each other like a magazine ad for cozy fall weekends. Except the caption wasn't cozy. Family day without the drama. I stared at the screen, my mouth literally hanging open. Leah was in a hospital bed, scared and alone, and this is what they were doing? A picnic and wine, like it was a reward for leaving my daughter behind? I didn't comment. I didn't message. I didn't scream into the phone like I wanted to. I just sat there and took it in. The silence, the photo, the fact that no one, not one of them, had bothered to check in on her. Or me. That night I barely slept. I stayed awake, watching the ceiling, wondering how long this had been going on. How many other things they'd quietly ignored just like this. By morning, I'd arranged for my friend Camille to pick Leah up from the hospital. She's one of the few people I trust without question. Camille said Leah had cried a little, said she was just tired. No fever, no infection. The doctors said it was stress. I knew exactly what kind. Leah's teacher had yelled at her over an unfinished assignment, something small. That was the trigger. But it wasn't just that. It was everything. Being away from me. Feeling like a burden to people who treated her like one. Friday couldn't come fast enough. The moment I landed, I didn't even stop at home. I drove straight to my parents' house. I walked in and there they were. My dad in his chair. My mom arranging cookies. My sister scrolling through her phone. Leah was sitting quietly on the couch. I didn't even close the door. Why did you do that? No one moved. Leah didn't lift her head. My dad looked at the TV. My sister rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. And then my mom smiled. That cold little smile she saves for when she thinks she's the smartest person in the room. And then she said something that made me take a step back. She looked at me, smiling like she was waiting for this moment, and said because she needed to learn not everything is about her. I stood there staring at her, trying to figure out if I'd heard her wrong. But no one else in the room even flinched. My dad looked back at the TV. My sister kept scrolling on her phone. Leah sat motionless on the couch, her hands in her lap, staring at the floor. I said she's 8. My mom just shrugged. And 8-year-olds need to understand boundaries too. Maybe if you didn't spoil her, she wouldn't fall apart every time someone tells her no. I don't know what I felt first, the rage or the disbelief. But it rose fast. I looked at my sister. She had her phone in her hand, and when she noticed me staring, she rolled her eyes. You knew she was in the hospital. He said, yeah, Mom mentioned it. But by then they were already halfway to the winery, and they figured it wasn't serious if the school didn't call again. So you posted a photo. Family day without the drama. That was about my kid. He shrugged. I was joking. I didn't mean Leah specifically. You just always make everything so intense, Grace. It's exhausting. I started to speak, but she cut me off. Besides, what were we supposed to do? Cancel our plans because she got overwhelmed at school? She's fine, right? It wasn't like she had a seizure. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These people, my family, were talking about my daughter like she was a disruption. Like she was some extra piece of luggage they were forced to drag around. I asked my mom what exactly had happened that day, and she gave me her version. Apparently Leah had forgotten part of her homework, and her teacher made a comment in front of the class. That was all it took. She started crying, couldn't catch her breath. The school called. My mom was making soup. My dad was busy watching some online auction. So they told the office they weren't available. And you know what? She added, he's too sensitive. You treat her like glass so she cracks like glass. That's on you. I looked over at Leah. She hadn't moved. I knelt down in front of her and whispered her name. She looked up at me for a second, and I swear it wasn't fear in her face. It was shame. Like she thought this whole thing really was her fault. I told her to grab her coat. My mom asked where I thought I was taking her. I didn't answer. I stood up and told my sister she was a mother too. What would she have done if someone left her son in a hospital bed alone? She just scoffed and said that's different. I wouldn't leave my kid for 2 weeks. That's when I stopped talking. There was no point. I walked to the door, took Leah's hand and opened it. Not a single person in that room moved to stop me. Not one of them even asked where we were going. When I stepped outside with her, the air felt cold. But it was the kind of cold that felt clean. Like I could finally breathe again. Like we were free. I buckled her into the car, sat in the front seat and just stared at the steering wheel for a moment. Then I turned the key. And I started thinking. I had a plan forming already and they had no idea what was coming. I didn't take Leah home right away. We drove around for almost an hour. She didn't say much, just stared out the window, chewing on her thumbnail. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, waiting for her to speak, ask a question, anything. He didn't. At one point I offered to stop for ice cream and she just shook her head. It wasn't about ice cream. We pulled into a quiet park on the edge of town where no one really went this time of year. The swings were empty, the picnic tables still damp from the morning frost. She sat on the bench next to me, legs dangling, silent. I told her I was sorry. Not because I caused what happened, but because I left her with people who never deserved her trust. And that I wouldn't make that mistake again. She didn't say anything. But she leaned into me a little and I felt her breathing even out. That night, after she was asleep in her own bed again, I sat down at my laptop. My parents had always depended on me more than they realized. For the last 5 years, I'd been the one quietly handling everything behind the scenes. Banking, utilities, insurance, even their property taxes. It had started as a favor, then became an expectation. My mother was proud of not understanding anything digital and my dad had gotten lazy with it. I logged into all of their accounts. I had access to everything. Electric, gas, water, their mortgage, autopay, even their insurance portal. The homeowner's policy was due for renewal in 9 days. I paused it, unlinked my business card from their utilities, removed every single automatic payment I'd set up. I also changed the email addresses back to theirs and set all communication to paper mail. If they wanted to act like I didn't exist, fine. Let's see how well they handled life without me. Then I checked the credit card account I'd opened for them years ago under my name, just to help with groceries and prescriptions. They had never paid a cent toward it. I closed it. Permanently. By morning I'd pulled out of every part of their life. And I didn't say a word about it. The first text came a week later from my dad. Something about not being able to log into the electric account. He asked if I'd changed the password. I wrote back one word. Yes. He asked if I could reset it. I wrote back, you're a grown man. Try harder. My mom called 3 days after that. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call and another. Finally, a text. The gas company says we're past due. What is going on? I texted her back. You didn't want to be bothered with emergencies. I'm just respecting that. She replied instantly. Called me selfish. Told me I was punishing them over a misunderstanding. That kids are dramatic, and she was fine, and you always overreact. Then she threw in something about how no one else in the family agrees with you. I texted back. I'm not in your family anymore. She stopped responding after that. But I wasn't done. I posted a picture on Facebook. Leah and I at the planetarium. She had a giant cup of lemonade and I was pretending to fall over in front of a model of Mars. He was laughing in the shot, full belly laugh. Real joy. I captioned it Family Day. Just the two of us. Peaceful, safe and drama-free. The next morning I had an email from the water company. Final notice before shutoff. I forwarded it to my mother's email without a word. Later that week she showed up at my door. She stood on the porch with a folder in her hands, papers sticking out of it. I didn't even have to open the door to know it was all the bills and shutoff notices she didn't know how to handle. I opened the inner door but left the screen shut. She asked if we could talk. Asked talk about what? She said you've made your point. I said no, I really haven't. Then I told her something I'd been thinking about since the hospital call. You saw my daughter as a burden. That was your mistake. And now you're no longer part of her life. Or mine. She tried to say something else but I stepped back and closed the door. Leah was in the living room building something out of Legos. She looked up when I came in, but she didn't ask who it was. She just smiled and said, "Can we make pancakes for dinner?" And I said yeah. That night we ate pancakes with whipped cream and watched a movie in our pajamas. No more favors. No more guilt. No more keeping anyone in our lives who made her feel small. And my parents? They still hadn't figured out I'd also filed a formal complaint against Leah's teacher. I thought the worst of it was over. I'd cut them off. I'd shut down their access to everything I used to handle. Leah was back with me, safe, sleeping through the night again. The complaints were filed, the doors were closed, and I was finally breathing like I hadn't in years. But I should have known better. 3 days after my mother showed up on my porch with that pathetic stack of unpaid bills, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. I was in the middle of making breakfast, Leah humming to herself in the living room, drawing a picture of a tree with wings. But something told me to answer. The woman on the phone introduced herself as a caseworker from Child Protective Services. The words didn't even make sense at first. She said a report had been made about Leah. Concerns about her collapsing at school. About her emotional state. About my frequent travel and lack of stable adult presence in the home. For a moment I actually thought I was going to throw up. I asked who reported it. She said she couldn't say. But I already knew. They had crossed a line I never thought even they would dare touch. The caseworker was calm. She said the report didn't require Leah to be removed, just that they needed to follow up. Ask questions. Schedule a home visit. Nothing personal, just protocol. I spent the rest of that day cleaning every inch of the house, checking on Leah every 20 minutes. I didn't tell her everything, just that someone was coming to visit. Someone who wanted to make sure kids were being taken care of. She asked if it was because of her collapse. I said kind of. She looked down and asked if it was her fault. And I just said never. The caseworker came that Thursday afternoon. Leah sat with her in the living room while I stayed in the kitchen. I could hear murmurs. Then little snippets. The teacher yelling, the hospital, the winery photo. At one point I heard Leah say they didn't even wave goodbye. They just left me there. I had to walk into the garage and breathe through my shirt to keep myself from breaking down. When they finished, the caseworker sat with me at the dining table. She said this wouldn't go any further. That Leah was safe, clearly cared for, and the environment here was stable. Then she said something I didn't expect. She said this wasn't the first report involving my parents. Apparently, years ago, my sister had filed something during a custody dispute with her ex. Something about leaving her youngest alone in the backyard for hours while they were too busy. It never escalated back then, but the names were flagged. And patterns mattered. Then I told her about the teacher. Not just what happened to Leah, but what I'd done about it. The complaint. The documents. The medical note. And something new. Another parent had reached out to me after hearing what happened. Her son had been told to stand in the hallway for an hour without supervision for forgetting his workbook. The caseworker nodded slowly and said she'd make sure all of it was added to the file. I walked her to the door. She shook my hand and said something I didn't expect. Whatever storm you're standing in, you're doing the right thing. I didn't realize until that moment how badly I needed to hear that from someone who didn't owe me anything. That night, my sister finally called me. Her voice was tight, like she was holding back from screaming. She said, "You've gone too far." Said, "Funny. I was about to say the same to you." She accused me of calling CPS on our parents. I told her I didn't have to. They did it to themselves. Then she said something that didn't sit right. "You know they're saying Leah made it all up? That she faked the collapse for attention?" I didn't respond. Because right then I looked over and saw Leah sitting on the living room floor with her drawing. She had added tiny birds flying out of the branches of the winged tree. And underneath it, in bubble letters, she'd written, "This is a safe place." I told my sister, "You don't get to speak about my daughter anymore." Then I hung up. The next morning I woke up to an email from the school district. The teacher had been terminated. Not transferred. Not put on leave. Fired. And permanently banned from teaching in the district pending a state-level investigation. And that night, Leah crawled into my bed around 2 a.m., curled up next to me and whispered, "I don't feel scared here anymore." Neither did I. After the teacher was fired and the complaint became official, everything went quiet. Like someone cut the power. No texts. No calls. Not a single, "How is Leah doing?" or "Can we talk?" Just silence. It should have felt like peace, and for a few days it did. Leah was laughing more, drawing again, sleeping through the night. I'd wake up before her and just watch her breathe. The weight on her shoulders had lifted, and she didn't even realize she'd been carrying it. But the silence didn't last because they were finally ashamed. It lasted because they were regrouping. I found out in the dumbest way possible. At the grocery store, standing in line behind a woman I barely knew. Someone from the old neighborhood. She turned around, smiled too wide, and said she was so sorry to hear about everything. I asked what she meant. She said, "Your mom told me about your breakdown. That things have been hard for you mentally, that you're under a lot of stress. It must be hard doing it all alone. She meant it as sympathy, but I felt my stomach twist. I asked if she heard that directly from my mom. She nodded like it was nothing. Said my parents were worried. That they were just so heartbroken about losing contact with their granddaughter and hoped I'd come to my senses. I left my groceries right there in the cart and walked out of the store. I drove home in silence. Leah was at school and all I could think about was how fast they moved to paint me as the problem. They hadn't just made peace with what they did. They'd rewritten the story entirely. That night I posted something on Facebook. Nothing specific. Just a photo of Leah barefoot in our backyard laughing with the sprinkler going. The caption said, "Nothing in the world is heavier than a mother's silence. And nothing is lighter than her peace." I didn't tag anyone. Didn't say a word to them. But I knew they saw it. The next morning I got a letter. Not a text, not a call. A real envelope in my mailbox, return address from a law office across town. I opened it at the kitchen table, half expecting it to be some forced apology they couldn't bring themselves to say out loud. Instead it was a demand letter. They wanted compensation for financial services previously provided. Claimed I'd created significant financial disruption by removing myself without notice. They wanted me to pay them for bills I used to handle voluntarily. Everything from their insurance to their trash collection. I read it twice. Then a third time. They were trying to bill me for cutting them off. I didn't get angry. Not right away. I laughed actually. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. It was the kind of move people make when they've run out of leverage and are scrambling to look powerful. I called the number on the letter. Got a receptionist. Left a message. The attorney called back within the hour. He sounded polite, maybe even slightly embarrassed. I told him I was happy to clarify a few things. I said the card they used to pay their bills? It's mine. The utilities? In my name. The auto pay? That was my account. I didn't remove services. I removed myself from being used. If they want to take that to court, I'll be happy to bring 5 years of documentation, along with hospital reports, child protective services records, and evidence of their neglect. He was silent. Then said, "I'll speak to them." I said, "You do that." I hung up. I didn't hear from him again. But something about the letter shifted everything in me. They weren't just cruel. They weren't just manipulative. They were transactional. And when they couldn't benefit from me anymore, they tried to turn me into a liability. That night, Leah came into the kitchen while I was cleaning up and asked, "Why does Grandma say you're mean?" I froze. I asked where she heard that. She said someone at school mentioned it. Their mom had told them something. So they were talking to other parents. Spreading things. Whispering behind doors they didn't think I'd hear through. I sat down with Leah, told her the truth again, the simpler version. That some people don't like it when you stop letting them hurt you. That when you take away the part of you they used to use, they get angry. And scared. And loud. She looked at me for a while like she was figuring something out. Then she said, "I'm glad we left." I didn't answer right away. But inside I knew I was too. That week I got the final confirmation email from the district office. The teacher was fired. Not just from the school. Blacklisted from teaching again pending a full investigation. Apparently I wasn't the only parent who had come forward. My report opened the floodgates. Leah and I sat on the couch that night, eating popcorn for dinner and watching some movie I forgot to pay attention to. She fell asleep on my lap halfway through. I didn't move for hours. There was no noise. No texts. No threats. Just silence. And this time it wasn't empty. It was ours. There was no dramatic finale. No emotional last message. No one showed up at my door with an apology or tears or even anger. Nothing. Just silence. Not the kind you hope for after a storm, but the kind that tells you the other side has stopped pretending to care altogether. And that was fine. I had already decided. I deleted their numbers. Not just blocked, deleted. I logged into the last of their old accounts still linked to me, cleared my name off everything and shut them down. No more helping them with their passwords. No more reminders about insurance renewals. No more quiet, thankless work that they treated like my duty. I'd done enough. Leah never asked about them again. I think she could feel it too, that quiet shift, that sense that something heavy had been removed. She was sleeping through the night, eating better, laughing at cartoons again. She even joined an after-school art club, which she never would have done before. One afternoon she came home with a painting of a lion. I asked if it was from a story. She said no. "It's me," she said. I stared at it a long time. It was strong. Bold lines. Bright colors. A little wild around the edges, like she hadn't tried to control it too much. Just let it be. That's how she was becoming. That weekend we built a blanket fort in the living room. Not just a small one. It had a roof made of 3 quilts, a flashlight taped to a chair leg and 2 snack stations inside. He called it the safe house. We stayed in it until midnight, watching movies on a tablet and pretending we couldn't hear the outside world. That's when she asked softly if we were ever going to see Grandma or Grandpa again. I said no. She looked at me for a long time, then nodded. Good, she whispered. I don't like how I felt at their house. And just like that, it was done. Not with rage or tears or some dramatic scene. Just clarity. Quiet, final, and real. After she went to sleep, I sat alone in the fort and scrolled through old photos on my phone. Birthday parties, holidays, moments where everyone was smiling. But now all I could see was the rot underneath it. The way my mother's smile was always a little too tight. The way my father stood apart like he was never really involved. My sister, always a step ahead of me in every photo, like she needed the world to see her first. I deleted the whole folder. That night I filed one last thing. A legal notice removing them from all future guardianship or emergency contact documents. If anything ever happened to me, Leah would go to Camille. Not them. Never them. Then I went to bed. And for the first time in years, I didn't wake up in the middle of the night wondering what I did wrong. The final confirmation came a few days later in an email from the school district. The teacher who had humiliated Leah wasn't just fired. She was being flagged at the state level. Permanently banned from working in education. Apparently after my report, more came in. He had a pattern. They didn't ignore it this time. They listened. And as I sat there reading it, Leah ran up behind me with paint on her hands, laughing. She said she accidentally turned our mailbox blue. I told her I didn't care. And I meant it. Because I didn't care about messes anymore. Not the kind that come from joy. I'd spent years trying to be the glue in a family that never held me up. But now I wasn't holding anything together. I was building something new. Not perfect. But ours. And unbreakable.